Welcome. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
I'm excited for you to be here. Could you take just a minute and introduce yourself so that everyone's really familiar with your background?
All right. You're not going to like me very much. I'm
Be close, yeah.
I'm a Linux systems administrator. I started in the open source community back in the late 90s, and worked with software projects and network security projects over the years. Launched several companies, filed some patents. Was very frustrated with the process, and then went back to the open source community and realized that there's this huge business model that the open source concept or philosophy fosters, and it's much more effective than using intellectual property in the legacy sense. So I started a company called ByteFederal after meeting my partner while writing software. He's one of the founders of the cryptocurrency space. He wrote Mars Coin. He's such a nerd that he's currently consulting with NASA, and so yeah. Several years later, we're watching, the foundation of cryptocurrency really start to take root, and it's impressive.
Cryptocurrency is a very hot area for patents, for sure. I love that you brought up Linux. Red Hat is one of the largest patent holders in many spaces.
Thank you. That's a good thing, because they're one of the rare ones who they file patents and then they just allow the community to utilize them, whereas in most cases that's not.
That's a really great point. A lot of people have a misunderstanding about open source and the open source communities. Actually, there still is a rigorous protection and securement of rights in IP, and then under contract or agreements with everyone who wants to participate in open source, they're allowed to freely use them as long as they comply with the terms of those agreements, right?
Yes, exactly. There's several versions of the general public license that function that way as well. I'm not sure how many there are, but one of the licenses allows you to put your invention into the public domain, but nobody's allowed to commercially offer it. There are many versions or iterations of that. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, what the open source movement, what these ideas do, what these constructs or these frameworks for publishing your ideas, as it were, what they do is they give you market access that the legacy intellectual property construct doesn't. So if you have a great idea and you come to us, I'm part of the community of millions that foster open source projects. If you come to us with these ideas, if a group of people aggregate around it, I call it a mesh republic. They aggregate around it. They're all of like mind. They may argue amongst each other, but they facilitate amazing things. And all of a sudden, within a week or a month, you've got millions of people who are aware of your project, millions of people who are willing to help on every level. So whether it's just downloading and using, or whether it's being a tech writer, or whether it's actually writing software. And the chances are, and this is how it happens in almost every case, you continue to retain control over your project as long as you're a responsible party, as long as you continue to, facilitate the innovation, as long as you provide the proper customer support, as long as your company survives, as it were, you will continue to retain control of that project. There are many projects like that in the Linux space, Apache being one of them. Right. It's like almost the entire internet is Apache, and it's all they named it Apache because it was a patchy piece of software.
Perfect.
Cool stuff.
You have such great experience in cryptocurrency. Talk to us a little bit about that. Crypto sometimes has a bad rap, but we'd like to hear a little bit more about it from your perspective.
Thank you. I think I was reading Slashdot, which was one of the great online geek rags of the time, and I read an article about this innovation called, it was an open source project called Bitcoin. And I read the article and I was like, that's a pretty cool idea. I mean, it's great to abstract the trust issue, that trust complexity out of financial systems. And it didn't really dawn on me at the time. I actually didn't really get involved in Bitcoin until right around 2014, when I ended up working at a software company. And my partner, Leonard Lopin, is the Mars Coin founder. He was heavy into it. He was so impressed with the potential that cryptocurrency, the blockchain, the Bitcoin itself represents from a perspective of individual liberty and global market enablement. It's so powerful that I'm not sure I can actually articulate its value. I'm not sure any of us actually know how useful this new technology is. I've said to my partners and to others, I think we're all kind of still in pre-alpha, not in terms of the software stability, but in terms of its utilization to all of humanity. I mean, what is there, like just slightly north of 1 billion unbanked people on this planet, and all of a sudden they can, if they have a cell phone and access, they can get a wallet, they can participate in this value conversation, this value communications network that's been created, and there's no other discriminatory effects, there's no wild inflation, at least in terms of Bitcoin. There'll only ever be just under 21 million units created by the software. On top of that, you have the elimination of this trust issue, which is in an enormous efficiency shift. So if you look at the legacy financial systems, they require third parties to validate all kinds of things. We deposit a check, it takes 7 days. You deposit Bitcoin in your wallet, it can take like between 7 seconds and a few hours, depending on network load. But it's a profound technology. Open source, mind you, technology. So
glad to hear that again. I have seen some surprises in patent trends in this area. When we use the magic number software, part of what we're looking for are trends, what's happening over time. And we not only look at that data, but we look at market data so we can understand what's really taking impact or making traction in the market, if you will. It surprised me a lot to see that the top patent holder for cryptocurrency for quite a while and over time has been Bank of America, who tends to denounce cryptocurrency. Do you have a thought or explanation for that?
Yeah, the first word that I came up with, and I toiled with actually, elucidating this, it's parasitic. I mean, quite literally, they've fought us on every level. When we founded our company, we had to interview over 450 banks to get a bank account. It was complete torture. And so through this process, I've seen that particular bank act in completely anti-competitive ways against our industry, against the technology. And now, here they come with derivative works of an open source project, and they file patents on it so they can leverage it against us. I call BS. I think that it's wrong. I think it should be illegal to create patents out of, open source projects, personally.
It's surprising, certainly, to see a company like traditional Bank of America, investing so heavily in technology or taking it, perhaps, as you suggest, from the open source area. But we tend to see a lot of collaboration between traditional banks and tech companies. Other, obviously, major players in the cryptocurrency patent space include some of the largest tech companies. Do you have thoughts on that? They're heavy in patents as well.
It depends on how they're utilized. So again, if it's utilized to foster community innovation and to continue to support free markets, then yes, we'll continue to leverage the legacy system. But it's not necessary. We're doing all kinds of cool things. Can't remember the CEO's name of IdeaBlock, but they're taking blockchain and using it as a methodology for instant intellectual property creation. So you take your idea. I think it's based on Ethereum. You put it into a form and you click submit, and it adds it permanently to a blockchain. And now you have proof positive that you've officially published this idea, and you haven't had to go through the 6-year waiting period and expensive attorney cost. Sorry, guys, but it is pretty heinous.
We've met with them before. Actually, they're in my home state of North Carolina.
IdeaBlock is?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
They are. And an interesting concept. He's also a patent attorney. And part of their motivation has been to allow for this very low cost defensive publication. The thing that they end up missing out on from just publishing an IP is that you don't have the exchange of the idea in full disclosure for exclusive rights, which is what most companies value. But I think it's a great source of providing for prior art information, also for trade secret registration. The blockchain is a great place to prove and ensure that it's clear that you have taken steps to proactively protect trade secret rights through that documentation. And that can be helpful as a defense if patent infringement comes up later. So
Right.
there's some very good uses of that. One of the things about patents, of course, is that it's just one type of intellectual property that can be used. They are expensive to create and they can take a long time. We will say the Patent Office has been getting faster and more streamlined in working on those, and there are fast track approaches to take with filing and moving toward issuance in about 1 year, which is helpful. But let's talk a little bit more about the blockchain compared to cryptocurrency, because I think there's some misconception that blockchain always means cryptocurrency and vice versa. So talk a little bit about why blockchain is more than merely a cryptocurrency vehicle, if you will.
Yeah, from the geek perspective,
Yes.
it's like split right down the middle. The blockchain is, in essence, an encrypted database or an encrypted public ledger, if you will. That's the cryptocurrency side of it. But it's also an amazing technological advancement. It's probably the most important technological advancement in software that we've had in at least a decade or longer. It solved the Byzantine generals problem, as you know, which is a complicated way to keep all parties on the same set of orders to execute the same set of functions in a specific set of circumstances. And this blockchain is a very complicated piece of software, but ultimately it's a distributed encrypted database, and it has great potential from the trust perspective. So every time you need data preservation, that's absolute, like, say, voting systems, or the governments from the municipal all the way through to the federal side. You can implicitly identify behaviors of people over time, and it's locked in, and you can't go back and change it. You can't obfuscate any piece of it without enormous, maybe even quantum level computing power, and they're quite a ways from that. So, as far as a blockchain itself, it's just the database that's encrypted and has this consensus function built into it. So all parties have to agree, and if there's an outlier, then the majority of the systems basically either block out or call into question the out of hash party. So out of hashed or out of sync party, as it were.
So it sounds like you have a great deal of confidence in the blockchain for security, apart from maybe quantum computing being able to move a step ahead or two. Do you see any other security risks beyond the benefits of blockchain?
From the perspective of ByteFederal, we definitely see risks. So one of the big problems in anything, any level of computing, is the consumer devices, your cell phones, your laptops, your desktop computers. There's no way for you to ever be certain that they're not infected with some form of malware, or that somebody's not snooping onto your computer in a clandestine form. They set up a camera and watched you type your password in. So one of the things that we're very proud of from our perspective, we're a Bitcoin ATM operators. We have kiosks all over the country. Our systems are extremely well hardened. I've spent a small portion of my career doing systems analysis, and they call it penetration testing to break into computers. I'm not very good at it. There are guys much better, but and girls, but. Yeah, so our systems are extremely hardened to that, whereas the consumer products aren't. So there's even a virus out, I think that's not technically the correct term, but there's a Trojan out that takes over your copy-paste function And when you copy a wallet address, it changes it to their wallet address. So you send Bitcoin to the wrong address. And that's
tricky.
That's kind of unfortunate.
How do you protect from that?
That is a tough one. There are wallet providers, the software app creators like Jax, and there's several others. I like Jax. That do a pretty good job of hardening that function on your specific device, but I'm not 100% sure I can speak with eloquence about it.
That's okay. That's okay. Other challenges that you see with the blockchain being used more widely, like demand on our electric power grid, for example.
Interesting. I'd like to get into more detail as to what you mean by the integration into utility class stuff.
Well, first of all, I'm asking maybe a simpler question.
Okay.
There's a lot of energy or power required.
Oh, yeah, from the validation process.
Right, from the...
Yeah, that I'll agree with. But, the universe is just packed with lots of energy, so we're just going to keep using it in ridiculous ways.
Fabulous. I think many in California are without power now, probably not in full agreement. But there are a lot of really fabulous applications of going beyond just the distributed ledger, but the smart contracts and automated implementation of agreements. We're working with a company called Equity Shift that's using the blockchain to provide for an opening of secondary markets for private securities. And they have taken great pains to be fully compliant with SEC regulations and all of the current regulatory issues that we face. Regulatory issues have been somewhat limiting on the cryptocurrency in the U.S., haven't they? Talk about that.
It's funny. When I founded the company with my partner in November 2016, it took us like 2 weeks to realize that the federal requirements for compliance were enormous, that there were aspects of the Banking Secrecy Act and SEC regulations. And I think the Patriot Act also plays a role in how we do business. And so I went to a friend of mine who's a CPA and asked him to become our third partner because I had absolutely no clue how to handle the compliance requirements. And since then, we're actually one of the leaders in the compliance side of things. We built all of our software around that one big problem. But after doing so, I've read announcements that some horrible legislation passed and and the federal government's all over us. And then you go and you read it and you're like, well, that's the way it's been since the beginning. There's no new changes. So when you asked about legislation that's impacting us, there's not really anything on the books right now that is of significance to the business model that's existed as long as we've been there. So.
Federally, maybe. A lot of states seem
Yes.
to not have taken kindly to cryptocurrency. I know in North Carolina, it's been difficult to have access to all the wallets that may be available or to really invest in cryptocurrency. Is there any state legislation that you follow or that you're interested in?
Yeah, Wyoming's awesome. Caitlin Long's our hero. She's done great work creating some great legislation there. My CFO, Mark Pialillo, just wrote the legislation for the state of Florida within the last week.
So you're very actively engaged in the conversation about how to regulate in this area.
Yeah, it's really a process of we as a country are leaders. We're industry leaders. We're corporate leaders. We're great innovators, and this is a hugely important innovation that has the power to set basically the global citizenry free of all these legacy systems, and introduce a whole billion people to a new market or to all the markets, as it were. And so we have a real huge responsibility to make sure this happens right.
Very disruptive, but responsible of you to shepherd that along. Now we can see why perhaps the traditional banking institutions, financial institutions might not be embracing it, that they will be wondering what their role will be in the transaction. They're used to being in the middle, aren't they?
Right.
Exactly. So how do you keep up with that? I imagine that there are a lot of large entities, financial institutions among them, that are not making it easy to advance legislation. What advice do you have for smaller companies or for early stage companies that are seeking to be active in the areas of blockchain and cryptocurrency?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Yeah, they definitely put up walls. And if you're a new small business starting in the space, you really need to find a partner that has all the experience. We get phone calls and emails all the time of people wanting to, get into the space, and we really can't help them. Like there's no way they can afford the barrier to entry, and that's all legislative in origin. So the problem is now that we're past that barrier. Of course, I'm voting. I'm not voting. I don't support any further draconian efforts on the part of any of the legislation. But alternatively, it did cost us massive quantities to get through those processes, and then to free up the market and enable everyone super cheap. Then we just, we took it on the chin, and everybody else gets a free pass. I don't know how to answer that question, really.
That's such a generous move, So you did pay lawyers one way or another,
Oh,
I guess.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. Several of them.
For sure. We see a lot of other applications for micropayments to encourage engagement through normal activities. I'll go back to the electric power grid again. To encourage people to save energy or save power, there have been proposed some systems that provide for micropayments when you participate in demand response and raise the temperature in the room a little bit when it's hot outside. What are some other interesting applications of micropayments and maybe even industries where you think there's great opportunity for the blockchain and for cryptocurrency?
Well, my partner loves to talk about the fast lane that doesn't exist. So your wife is pregnant and you're 20 minutes from the hospital and the baby's coming, and you mash the "oh God, I need to go fast" button in your car, and it makes micropayments to everyone in front of you, and they part the seas and you take off. We're not. Again, it's all in pre-alpha. Like I said, there's so many things that this technology can become, and the micropayments is a really interesting idea. There are so many directions it can go in that I think it's beyond the scope of this conversation.
It's fun to touch on it a little bit. We've worked, for example, with a Silicon Valley-based company called GeoNetwork that provides for geofencing, or if you will, another way to think about using those virtual fences is controlling what's in your space or your territory, including information. So if I'm wanting to shield from those advertisements that hit my phone as I walk by, maybe I'll agree to accept them if I receive a micropayment for that, for example. Or when you think about allowing UAVs or drones to fly over your property, might be nice if Amazon kicked back a little bit. Those are the kinds of micropayment applications we're familiar with. It seems like there could be millions more.
Yes, definitively. That gets back to the whole who owns your data conversation, which we're a huge fan of the giving that back to giving your data, the power over your data back to the people. It makes complete sense. And so if you're willing to be continuously berated by the annoying advertisements, then you should be paid for it. I totally agree.
It seems like that's a solution to the concern or problem that I've also heard about the jobs in our country and around the world maybe going away because of being replaced by machines or computers, that people can be paid for giving information. People can be compensated for data exchange. What do you think about that?
I think it's a wonderful idea. Unfortunately, it probably won't be lucrative enough, especially because it's a supply and demand curve, as you well know. And if the supply of individuals willing to give their data is enormous, then the amount of money they're paid individually for that data will not be exceptional.
Would be small, except for time and place. Let's talk about time for a second, because it seems like with more data moving around, there's maybe not as much free flow of the information or the movement of data from one point to another, especially as we get into the 5G world that we're moving into, the Internet of Things opening up. If many things around this room are now communicating more information than ever before, sensors everywhere, won't there be kind of a data blockage?
That's an interesting perspective. And in fact, the data blockage is most certainly related to the backhaul from the towers to the the backbone tech. I actually spent some time trying to build high performance computing data centers for big tech research, higher ed organizations like Lincoln Labs and such. And we talked all the time with Level 3 and Synesis and the big cable players, and the big joke was that you could just pack antennas on the towers, but it's not going to change the fact that it's this antiquated, fiber pair or worse, copper in the ground passing all that data back and forth. And that's why, the data blockage is a very real problem, but it's a layer one physical layer problem. It's not necessarily that we can't handle it computationally.
So maybe edge computing can offer some solutions there. Do you have thoughts on edge computing?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that was the previous company I started. It was called Pod Global, and I was trying to create an edge computing solution for high performance computing. And the ultimate dream of that was to do some semblance of commercial enablement on the edge services concept. Hunter Newby is was the chief strategic officer for Telex, and they were like, I think, the first carrier hotel in the country. They're like a neutral organization that allowed all these big carriers to come in, like AT&T and Verizon and Level 3. Those guys won't go into a building if the other guy owns it, and they will never trade traffic. But currently, the way that net neutrality, part of the details of how net neutrality functions is they trade traffic in these big carrier-neutral hotels, so nobody can one-up one another, right? And they do it for free, which is really super cool.
Wow. I wonder how they're keeping that up. That's so fascinating.
Anyway, so I lost my place. So Hunter Newby, he dumped his stock and he took off from Telex and he launched Allied Fiber. And Allied Fiber is a company that took that idea of a carrier-neutral hotel and built it in a distributed model. So they got a contract with the Norfolk Southern Railway. They built this super cool machine, and they're deploying huge amounts of fiber optics into the railway, adjacent to the railway. And what I wanted to do was build data centers and containers on that same railway. So we had this massive upgrade in network infrastructure, because we're like 23rd in the globe. Our infrastructure is not exactly exciting.
There's a lot to improve there. And as we get into smart vehicles, another trend area that we see from the magic number data, that investment in solutions, inventive solutions represented by patents in that area is really growing. But there's a lot of data that's going to be needed to pass from car to car, maybe from car to smart street light, and then backhaul. Talk a little bit about that.
I love mesh networks. They're wonderful. They're not exactly high bandwidth, but they don't need to be, because, again, it's just discrete pieces of data passing between all the little pieces, only the relevant pieces, so you're not, passing ridiculous quantities of unnecessary information. As far as that's concerned, the only conundrum with that is batteries. It all comes back to, can we sustain them? And there's been some profound advancements in battery technology, solid state batteries and the like. The guy that can't remember the guy's name who invented lithium ion, just came up with a dendrite-free process of building the same battery, but without the degradation over time. So it increases the chargeability rate by 3 or 4x, and that's significant. I mean, that goes, do the math from the perspective of a Tesla, where it has a 400-mile limit. Now it's got, a 1,200-mile limit. That's a huge difference. So the battery tech is really what's holding us up from a technological advancement standpoint, especially on mesh networks.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and something that's important, love Tesla. One of the great things that that we like about the patent system, I'm still pitching that to you here, the patent system, is that every patent application that issues to patent is published, and most patent applications themselves publish. That was the point of the whole system from the beginning, is to provide information that others can continue to improve on and build on. And that's one of the reasons that we set up magic number, is to make that information more accessible, because patents can be pretty tedious documents to read and most people don't want to do it unless they have to. That's why patent attorneys will charge you more.
Yes.
It's a lot to do. But tell me, we're nearing the end of 2019. What do you forecast for the future 2020?
So again, I hate to keep going back to the pre-alpha state, but as companies and individuals, we all have these unique products and services in and around the technology space, in and around blockchain or not. And it's just, I see a continued consolidation of these varying individual services into full suites and ways that these can continue to evolve. And I've always thought, like, there are videos where, not just videos, but things have been written throughout the ages of humans saying, well, everything's been invented. I totally disagree with that. I think it's the exact opposite. The more that gets invented, the more that can be invented off of these inventions, to support your previous statement about
Amen.
IP.
Amen, brother. I believe that's true.
So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more consolidations, a lot of significant advancements in varying individual platforms partnering to provide, surround the customer solutions. Even, so far as to say a new form of crypto banking, as it were, to step out beyond the Fiserv controlled cacophony of banks.
For sure, for sure. That's fascinating. I want to give a chance for audience questions as well. Does anyone have a question regarding the blockchain or even Bitcoin?
So I hear cryptocurrency is only used by hackers, Silk Road people buying drugs. What are some of the normal people using crypto for?
So we have to repeat the question. So we hear that cryptocurrency is being used by hackers and drug lords. What about the rest of us, the normal people, the law-abiding people? Is there a role for us in cryptocurrency?
So the assumption that it's utilized by criminals, it's only utilized by criminals who aren't going to be criminals very long, because again, it's extremely trackable. It's pseudo-anonymous. Like, if we get your ID and your name and your home address and your cell phone number to use our network. So if, let's say, the FBI can track a transaction back to our organization, we have to give that data over. So savvy criminals are still using the most profound representation of value for criminal activity, the US dollar. So yes, as far as like Bitcoin, it's far better as a legitimate method of value communication than it is as a clandestine money transfer methodology, because again, we can do deep chain analysis. There's a website, I think it's chainanalysis.com. That's been their focus since the beginning, is figuring out where it went, and they figure out where it went.
Perfect. I'd like to ask you a question about, you mentioned you do the Bitcoin ATMs, but there are so many different forms of cryptocurrency. What are some that you prefer or like, or do you have any that you're watching?
I love Bitcoin because it's the founder, and I'm that way. We all are. We don't like change. It's like Q-tip versus cotton swab, right? Kleenex versus tissue. So Bitcoin is really the founder of it. Everyone thinks Bitcoin when you say cryptocurrency, if they know what that word means. But there are projects out there that are profound. My favorite personal cryptocurrency is Bitcoin Cash, which deviated in a hard fork. The group that took and created Bitcoin Cash followed the original dogma of the white paper, which is to say, when Bitcoin ran into overages in terms of its utilization, the white paper just said increase the block size, and the core group said no. We're going to come up with all these other ways to solve the problem, and it's not really fixed the issue. Bitcoin Cash, on the other hand, has massive block sizes. I don't even know what they're at now. And from a computational standpoint, what's the most expensive part in your computer? What's the least expensive? The least expensive is the hard drive. We have massive storage, so who cares how big the block size is? But so anyway, I digress. Bitcoin Cash is a profoundly awesome technology and cryptocurrency. And if you look at its trend over time, it's pretty stable and it's very fast. Litecoin is a great one. Ethereum is a great one. Mars Coin, because it's just uber geeky, and intends to be the method of value communication in an interstellar fashion.
I like the interstellar. Intellectual property is going interstellar too. I think everybody be ready for that. Another question from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
How is Bitcoin being used in our everyday life as far as purchase?
There are probably thousands now of merchants that are utilizing it in varying forms. Unfortunately, Bitcoin itself isn't actually really good at that aspect of it because there are network fees associated with it. And so it's more a storage of value for most people, like a stock, than it is in terms of its use as a currency. It's not extremely great.
There was a really expensive pizza once.
Yeah, I think I met that guy at a conference. He's pretty jovial about the whole thing. Obviously, he's quite happy.
Excellent. Another question. Yes, sir.
Is there any concern among smaller businesses, specifically those working in the open source crypto space, about larger entities aiding them to market adoption with the open source software?
That's interesting. I love that question in particular because it's one of those things where.
Can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. He asked about the larger entities beating the smaller entities to market in terms of the delivery of cryptocurrency technologies. They can't stop being what they are. They're banks. No one wants to do business with them. If we had a choice, we'd do business with anyone. A fire ant hill is better. So, I think we all are pretty fed up with them, frankly. And I think this new technology really, offers up an ability for the smaller entities to step in, offer brilliantly innovative ways to utilize it. And, again, it's a question of who is the end provider. If it's some cool geek company, then I'm all in. And I think most of us are that way. So wouldn't you agree?
Terrific. One more question. Yes.
Can you help us understand what happens with a currency like Ripple? So first it's the next big thing and it's going to change the world and it's going to be $1,000, and then the next thing, the creators are kind of like making it for to enrich themselves, and there's too much of it in the marketplace. So can you just help us kind of sift through?
The question was about Ripple and how it didn't fulfill its marketing and why. Mm-hmm. The answer to that is virtually the same as the previous question. Ripple was supposed to be a stable coin that was backed by the banking institutions, and as soon as the population found out that it was banking interrelated, the market fell out. Nobody wanted to participate because they're banks. Nobody wants to play that game. When the opportunity is to go to any other tech company that's facilitating truly distributed solutions, why use a central authority coin, which is the same as it always has been, right? Why go that direction? So, Ripple is one of them. Almost all the stable coins, even the Facebook Libra coin is falling apart because it's centrally controlled. Nobody wants a central authority over the currency. Those days are over, hopefully.
Interesting and true. I think that's a trend that we see over all technologies is the move toward distribution, not centralization. Super. This is so exciting. I'm interested in asking you for one more thing. I'm about lists at the end of the year and the beginning of the year. You're optimistic going into 2020 about expansion of applications, about the blockchain and cryptocurrency. Any downsides, risks, or issues that we should have our eye on?
It's interesting. From the perspective of security, I think we have that well in hand. From the perspective of organizations, going through their machinations because their markets are doomed or changing significantly, I think probably the most scary part about the future is what the legacy institutions are going to do about it, and what kind of ridiculous legislation they're going to try and cram down everyone's throats.
Interesting. Thank you so much. One more question from the audience before we close. Yes, sir.
Can you give an example of how the blockchain will be used in terms of data privacy, GDPR?
GDPR, in terms of data privacy, it's encrypted. I'm not hugely in that space. I haven't actually gotten to write any code in 3 years, so I'm not in tune with that specific question. I think my partner, Lennart Lopen, would be a good one to ask. His email is lennart@bytefederal.com. I forgot how you spell his name. LENNART@bytefederal.com.
Super. Well, we really appreciate you sharing your expertise, your enthusiasm, and we love you being part of the first DC IP Forum. You'll continue, I'm sure, watching developments and creating them in the blockchain and cryptocurrency. We'll continue to watch how those are evolving through the lens of patent data and market data. So I hope to have a chance in the future to win you over to the patent side as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.